What if I told you the six-day creation story in Genesis isn't just a religious tale, but might be an ancient blueprint, a detailed account that aligns with modern science? Sounds crazy, right? But hold on, because the parallels are way too precise to ignore. We're not just talking vague similarities, there's a deeper connection here. When you read the Genesis creation account, the timeline is super clear, on the first day, on the second day, and so on. But what if those days aren't just 24-hour periods, but cosmic markers, like snapshots of stages in the development of the universe? Suddenly, the story becomes less about God waving a magic wand and more about a structured, deliberate process. Day 1 in Genesis says, "Let there be light," and boom, light appears. Now, compare that to the Big Bang Theory. Scientists agree that the universe started with an explosion of energy, a burst of light. It's like the Bible is describing the dawn of the cosmos in terms that ancient people could grasp. Coincidence? Or did they know something we didn't? And check this out, Day 2 talks about separating the waters above from the waters below, creating the sky. That's not just poetic imagery. Many scholars believe it might describe the early formation of Earth's atmosphere, separating water vapor from the forming oceans. Each day in Genesis appears to mirror major geological and biological shifts, almost as if it's laying out the stages of planetary evolution. Now, you've probably heard skeptics dismiss the Genesis account as outdated or irrelevant. But here's the thing. Modern astrophysics, geology, and even biology are starting to notice patterns that feel eerily familiar. We found evidence of rapid changes in Earth's early history, shifts that could fit into those days in ways no ancient writer could have guessed without some kind of insight. It's almost like there's a hidden layer in the text that's been waiting for us to uncover. Now, it's time to crack open the language and literary style of Genesis because, trust me, this ancient text is hiding more than meets the eye. You might think Genesis is just a straightforward narrative, but the way it's written is actually loaded with layers of meaning, layers that ancient readers would have picked up on instantly, but that modern readers might miss without a closer look. First off, let's talk about the structure. Genesis 1 is packed with repetition and rhythm. Every day follows a similar pattern. God speaks, something is created, God sees that it's good, and then the day closes with evening and morning. This kind of structure isn't just for decoration. In ancient Hebrew writing, repetition wasn't just about memory aids, it was a way to emphasize importance, to mark something as foundational. The way Genesis is written tells us that the act of creation was deliberate, measured, and precise like a cosmic poem. And the Hebrew language itself, it's a goldmine of meaning. Take the very first words, Bereshit bara Elohim. In English, we translate that to, in the beginning, God created. Simple enough, right? But the Hebrew is far more nuanced. Bereshit could mean in the beginning, but it can also imply in a beginning, suggesting that what's described might not be the absolute start of everything, but the beginning of a specific ordered cosmos. It's a subtle difference, but it opens up a whole can of interpretive possibilities about what Genesis is actually describing. Then there's the word bara, which we translate as created. It's a special term used exclusively for divine creation, only God barer. This isn't about fashioning something from existing materials, it's about bringing something new into existence. There's a sense of innovation, of creating something out of nothing, or at least something new out of the chaotic potential described earlier. And what about the phrase, "let there be light"? In Hebrew, it's just two words, yehi or. The verb yehi is a command, not a polite request. It's God's will taking shape in reality. There's power in the brevity, and the ancient audience would have felt the weight of that command, understanding that God's word is as much an action as a spoken phrase. It's not about a scientific process, it's about the authority of divine speech, the idea that words have the power to shape reality itself. The choice of words in Genesis isn't random. Even the phrases evening and morning at the end of each day carry significance. In Hebrew culture, a day begins at sunset, not sunrise. Evening comes first, symbolizing the transition from chaos and darkness to light and order. Each day is a movement from uncertainty to clarity, a pattern of progression that defines the creation process. And here's something that's often missed, the number symbolism in Genesis. Numbers aren't just quantities, they're symbolic too. The number 7, which dominates the creation story, is all about completeness and perfection in ancient Hebrew thought. Every time you see a multiple of 7 in the Bible, It's signaling that something is whole, finished, or divinely ordained. The 7-day cycle isn't just a framework for the week, it's a declaration that creation is whole, perfect, and purposeful. The literary structure also suggests something profound about the relationship between humanity and creation. The first 3 days establish realms, light and darkness, sky and waters, land and vegetation. The next 3 days fill those realms. The sun, moon, and stars govern the light. Birds and fish fill the sky and sea. Animals and humans inhabit the land. There's a symmetry to it, and a balance that suggests purpose and design. Alright, let's switch gears and dive deeper. Genesis isn't the only place where the concept of time and creation lines up with the cosmos. Ancient cultures around the world had their own way of marking time, using the stars, the moon, and the seasons as their guide. What's fascinating is how similar some of these ancient timekeeping systems are to the Genesis account. The Hebrews weren't isolated in a bubble. They lived in a world surrounded by cultures like the Egyptians and Babylonians, who were experts in astronomy. They tracked celestial events with an accuracy that still impresses scientists today. And here's where it gets interesting. These cultures all had their own stories about how the universe came to be, and they were all watching the same night sky. The Hebrew calendar itself has roots in a lunar system, and some scholars suggest that Genesis might have embedded astronomical observations. The idea of dividing time into days and weeks isn't random, it's based on something observable. So when the Genesis account divides creation into 6 days, it's possible those divisions were connected to celestial events like phases of the moon or the movement of constellations. Take a closer look at the number 7. The cycle of creation ends in 7 days, with the 7th being a day of rest. That pattern shows up in ancient calendars too, from the 7-day week to the cycles of agricultural festivals. It's almost like humanity has been hardwired to recognize these cosmic rhythms, and the Genesis account captures that awareness. Did the ancient Hebrews understand time in a different way than we do now? Were the 6 days of creation not just a religious framework, but a reflection of cosmic order, a divine calendar that aligned with the movements of the stars? Some argue that Genesis is not just about the Earth's formation, but a narrative that harmonizes with the heavens, revealing how ancient people saw themselves connected to the cosmos. So now that we've got the cosmic connections out of the way, let's get right into one of the biggest controversies. Are the Fides in Genesis literal 24-hour periods, or are they symbolic of longer epochs, ages that stretch across millions or even billions of years? First off, let's talk about the Hebrew word yom. It's the word used in Genesis for the day, and this is where things get tricky. In ancient Hebrew, yom can mean a literal day, like a 24-hour period, Yom Kippur, but it can also mean a longer, undefined span of time. We're not talking guesswork here. There are other places in the Old Testament where yom clearly refers to an era, not a single day. So why does it matter? Because the way we define those days completely changes the entire narrative. Now, the literalists argue that Genesis means exactly what it says, 6 consecutive 24-hour days, with God resting on the 7th. They point to phrases like evening and morning as evidence that the text is talking about literal days with a definite start and end. Some even argue that the very structure of the Genesis text, its rhythm, its repeated refrains, is built around this clear, literal framework. For them, any other interpretation is twisting the text to fit a modern agenda. But let's flip that around. Those who lean towards a symbolic interpretation see something different. They point out that the Genesis creation story has a poetic, almost liturgical quality. It's not just a story, it's structured like a hymn, with parallels and patterns that feel more like a grand metaphor than a scientific journal. For them, the 6 days aren't just days, they're ages, epochs, stages in the grand unfolding of the cosmos. Each the day marks a distinct phase in the progression from chaos to order, from darkness to light. And the evidence they use? Well, it goes deep. For instance, the 4th day talks about the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. But hold on, how can there be the days before the sun even exists? The symbolic camp says this is proof that Genesis isn't concerned with our modern concept of time. It's painting a picture, not laying out a literal timeline. It's about the order of events, not their exact duration. It's about principles, not precision. Now, why does this matter so much? Because if Genesis is symbolic, it opens up the possibility of harmony between science and faith. Suddenly, the Big Bang isn't a threat to the Bible, it's the first "let there be light." The formation of galaxies, planets, and Earth itself can be seen as unfolding over God's days, each phase matching what modern science tells us about the age and development of the universe. But here's the catch: not everyone's buying it. Some critics argue that the symbolic interpretation is a cop-out, a way for religious thinkers to dodge the bullet of scientific scrutiny. If you can stretch the day to mean anything you want, they say, you've taken the teeth out of the text. You've reduced it to a vague myth, stripped of any real power or authority. On the flip side, some literalists find the symbolic approach too convenient, a way to smooth over contradictions without addressing the core of what Genesis is trying to convey. This isn't a new debate either. In the early days of Christianity, scholars like Augustine wrestled with the same question: what did those days mean? Even back then, people knew there was something deeper going on, something more led than a straightforward, literal reading. And here's the kicker: this debate isn't just academic. It influences how we interpret everything from the age of the Earth to the role of humanity in the cosmos. Let's tackle one of the most fascinating aspects of Genesis that often gets overlooked. The story of creation is a battle between chaos and order. It's easy to read Genesis as a straightforward account of God creating things step by step, but there's a deeper theme running through those 6 days, a theme that ties Genesis to other ancient myths and reveals the cosmic struggle at the heart of the biblical narrative. In the opening verses of Genesis, the earth is described as formless and empty, with darkness over the surface of the deep. That might sound like a calm, empty scene, but in ancient Hebrew, those words paint a picture of chaos, primordial waters, churning and unformed, a place of disorder. This isn't just a peaceful blank slate, it's a chaotic void, a wilderness that needs to be tamed. And what does God do? He brings order out of that chaos step by step with each act of creation. Now, what's incredible is that this idea of order emerging from chaos isn't unique to Genesis. If you look at ancient creation myths from cultures all around the Near East, you'll notice something similar. The Babylonian Enuma Elish talks about Marduk slaying the chaos dragon Tiamat to create the world. In Egyptian mythology, the god Ra rises out of the chaotic waters of Nun to bring order to the cosmos. It's almost as if Genesis is tapping into a universal theme, a cosmic story that every culture seemed to understand in their own way. Genesis flips the script. In most of these myths, you've got gods battling monsters or other divine beings to establish order. In Genesis, there's no cosmic battle. God's word alone is enough to transform chaos into a structured, ordered world. Let there be light, and there is light. No bloodshed, no war, just pure, unchallenged authority. It's a radical departure from the chaos versus order stories we see in neighboring cultures. And this theme doesn't stop at creation. It reverberates through the rest of the Bible. Think about the story of the Exodus, where God parts the chaotic waters of the Red Sea to save Israel, establishing order in the midst of chaos. Or look at the Psalms, where God is often depicted as subduing the raging seas, another echo of that first act of creation. Even in the New Testament, you get Jesus calming the storm, once again showing divine authority over chaos. What does this mean for the 6-day creation? Each day is like a movement in a cosmic symphony, turning chaos into order. On day 1, God separates light from darkness, creating the first distinction in the void. By day 2, he's dividing the waters, setting boundaries between the heavens and the earth. By the time you get to day 6, there's a fully ordered world with humanity at its center, charged with the responsibility of maintaining that order. This isn't just about what God did, it's about how the entire cosmos was organized, brick by brick, command by command. It's why some scholars say that Genesis isn't just about the material creation of the world, it's about the establishment of order, function, and purpose. Everything in those 6 days, from the placement of the stars to the formation of creatures, is an act of setting boundaries, giving roles, and establishing a cosmic hierarchy. Why does the idea of a 6-day creation still make so many people uncomfortable, especially in the scientific community? Well, the Genesis story isn't just claiming that the universe has an order, it's asserting that this order is purposeful, intentional, and directed by a higher intelligence. It's not a random outcome of chaotic forces, it's a carefully orchestrated design. That's a pretty radical statement in an era where random chance and natural selection are seen as the engines of creation. Modern science tells us that the universe began with the Big Bang, and everything we see, from stars to planets to life on Earth, evolved over billions of years. The Genesis account, with its six-day framework, seems to fly in the face of that. But the tension isn't just about time frames, it's about meaning. The Genesis narrative says that creation isn't just a process, it's a story with a beginning, middle, and end. There's an ultimate purpose, a goal, and humanity plays a central role in it. And that brings us to one of the most provocative ideas embedded in the six-day account, humanity's place in the cosmos. According to Genesis, humans aren't just another species in a vast and indifferent universe. We're the climax of the creation story, given a unique role to rule over and steward the earth. In a world where humans are often seen as a tiny, insignificant blip in a cosmic timeline, the Genesis view is almost scandalous. It says we matter, deeply. Now think about the implications of that. If you accept the Genesis account, you're not just accepting a six-day timeline, you're embracing a worldview where everything, from the placement of stars to the tiniest blade of grass, has a purpose. You're rejecting the notion that the universe is a cold, uncaring place driven by impersonal forces. It is. Instead, you're saying there's an intentional design, and humans have a key role in it, a responsibility that comes with both privilege and accountability. Let's take a closer look at why this worldview rubs so many people the wrong way. For centuries, the scientific revolution and Enlightenment philosophy pushed back against any idea that humans were central to the cosmos. Copernicus dethroned Earth from the center of the universe. Darwin challenged the notion that humans were specially created, and modern cosmology tells us we're in a small corner of a galaxy that's just one among billions. But Genesis pushes back against all that, declaring that humanity is not just a cosmic accident, but a central character in a grand narrative. This clash isn't just philosophical, it's cultural. It touches on the way we live, the way we see our environment, and the way we think about progress. In Genesis, the world is seen as good, a place to be tended, valued, and cared for. In a modern context, dominated by technology and exploitation, that's a stark contrast. The Genesis account challenges a consumer-driven mindset by emphasizing stewardship and responsibility, implying that how we interact with the world matters at a fundamental level. But it's not just a question of human significance, it's about the very nature of truth and knowledge. The six-day creation story asserts that there's a foundational truth about the universe that can be known, even if it's revealed in a way that doesn't match our modern scientific language. It's claiming that truth isn't limited to what can be observed or measured in a lab, that there are realities beyond the empirical truths that are revealed through story, symbol, and sacred text. That's a direct challenge to a scientific worldview that prioritizes data and observable phenomena as the ultimate measure of what's real. And there's more. Genesis doesn't just challenge science, it also pokes at philosophical assumptions about progress. We're used to thinking about history as a linear progression from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to knowledge. But the six-day creation story doesn't follow that script. It presents a universe that was good right from the start, a cosmos that was complete, balanced, and harmonious from day one. Humanity's task wasn't to improve it, but to maintain and care for it. In a culture obsessed with advancement and technological dominance, Genesis suggests a different kind of progress, one that's rooted in balance, care, and understanding our role within creation. This might explain why, despite centuries of criticism and skepticism, the Genesis narrative hasn't faded away. It continues to resonate because it taps into something fundamental, a sense that the universe is more than just particles and processes, that life has purpose, and that we're part of a story that's bigger than ourselves. And for many, that's a compelling alternative to a worldview that often feels cold, detached, and mechanistic. Now, don't get me wrong, none of this is about rejecting science or saying it's wrong. It's about seeing that there's more than one way to understand the universe, more than one story we can tell about how we got here and why it matters. The Genesis account offers a vision of reality that's holistic, relational, and rich with meaning. It's not about answering every scientific question, it's about pointing to a different kind of truth, one that's less about data and more about significance, purpose, and relationship. Alright, so here's where we get to the part that everyone seems to skip over, the seventh day. It's strange, right? Genesis 1 is this rapid-fire account of creation, 6 days of intense, deliberate action. And then silence. God rests. No more let there be or dividing or naming, just a full stop. But this seventh day isn't just an afterthought. It's the crescendo, the grand finale, and it's packed with meaning that completely changes how we understand the creation narrative. First off, let's get the basics out of the way. Genesis says, "And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested." But here's what's often missed. The seventh day is the only one that doesn't end with evening and morning. In the other 6 days, we get this rhythmic closure, day and night, evening and morning, signaling a conclusion, but not on the seventh day. It's like the text intentionally leaves the seventh day open-ended, as if to suggest it never really ended. That's right, for many theologians and scholars think the seventh day is still ongoing. In other words, creation might not be a finished product, but an ongoing reality that we're living in right now. It's a provocative idea, because it changes the whole dynamic of the Genesis narrative. It's not just about what God did back then, it's about what's happening right now. God's rest isn't about God taking a nap, it's about sustaining the order that's been set, maintaining the balance and harmony of creation. And let's talk about that word rest. In English, rest sounds like inactivity, like God just sat back and relaxed after a hard week's work. But the Hebrew word used here, Shabbat, doesn't mean a cessation of all activity. It means a pause, a moment of reflection, a celebration of what's been completed. It's less about disengagement and more about a deep, purposeful enjoyment of creation. The seventh day is a declaration that the cosmos is good, whole, and worthy of being celebrated. It's about recognizing that creation has reached a state of completeness that allows for peace, for shalom. But there's another layer to this that goes even deeper. The seventh day becomes a template, a model for how humans are supposed to live. It's no coincidence that the idea of Sabbath, a day of rest, becomes one of the core commandments later in the Bible. The idea is that just as God rested, humans are also called to rest, to step back and recognize the goodness of the world. This isn't just a religious rule, it's a rhythm built into the fabric of creation itself. It's saying that to ignore rest is to deny something fundamental about the way the universe is designed. And think about this, if the seventh day is about God's rest, it implies that creation wasn't just for function, it was for relationship. The whole purpose of the 6 days wasn't just to make stuff, it was to set the stage for communion, for interaction between God, humanity, and the rest of creation. That's why the seventh day is sacred. It's about unity, connection, and acknowledging that creation is more than just a series of events, it's a relational reality. This brings us to another question. Why doesn't the seventh day have an evening and morning? Why does it feel like it's intentionally left open-ended? Some scholars argue that it's because the seventh day is pointing forward beyond the text itself. It's a kind of foreshadowing, a hint that creation is going somewhere, that history is moving toward a goal, a culmination that's still in progress. In other words, the seventh day might be hinting at a future where the rest of God is fully realized, where creation reaches its ultimate purpose. It's like the story of Genesis 1 is a prelude, setting up a much bigger narrative that unfolds throughout the rest of the Bible and beyond. And there's more. This seventh day isn't just significant within the Bible, it has cosmic implications. Think about how ancient cultures measured time, by cycles, by patterns in the heavens. The idea of a 7-day cycle, of a seventh day of rest, was revolutionary. It's not tied to the movement of the sun or the moon. It's a concept that stands apart, declaring that time itself has a rhythm that's sacred, that the universe has an inbuilt order that transcends mere astronomy. The Sabbath isn't just a day, it's a statement about the structure of reality. This idea of a perpetual seventh day, an ongoing divine rest, challenges modern concepts of time and progress. In a culture that's obsessed with productivity, constant activity, and never-ending advancement, the idea of rest as a divine command is almost countercultural. It's saying that there's a higher purpose than just doing, achieving, or producing. It's about being, celebrating, and existing in a state of harmony with the rest of creation. It's a radical shift from seeing the universe as a machine to be mastered to viewing it as a garden to be tended, enjoyed, and sustained. The seventh day also has echoes in the New Testament, where you see this idea of rest expanded into a spiritual concept. Jesus often speaks of a deeper rest, a rest for the soul that transcends physical relaxation, and in the book of Hebrews, the author talks about entering God's rest as an ultimate goal for humanity, a kind of return to the original harmony that existed in the garden. It's a powerful idea that the seventh day isn't just about what happened in the past, but about a future hope, a restoration of the original vision of creation. What makes this all the more compelling is that the seventh day invites participation. Unlike the first 6 days, where God is the primary actor, the seventh day brings humanity into the equation. It's an invitation to join in the rest, to live in a way that reflects the peace and order of creation. It's not about being passive, it's about aligning our lives with the rhythm of the cosmos, recognizing that there's a divine pattern to existence that calls for acknowledgement, gratitude, and care. Now, with all that in mind, how do we make sense of the Genesis creation story in today's world? The answers aren't simple, but one thing is clear: the narrative of Genesis 1, from the first word to the last, isn't just about the past, it's about our present and future. It's a call to see the world with new eyes, to understand that the story isn't over, and to embrace the mystery that the seventh day continues to reveal.